Hi Year 12s, today I'm going to be taking you through essay writing with particular reference to Unit 4 Area of Study 1. Okay, so first of all let's talk about what you're going to be assessed on, so what the essay is actually about. So these are the topics that you might find brought up in the essay question or in the stimulus. First is regional variation. Second is standard Australian English and its prestige value. Third is the features of non-standard varieties including Ethnolex and Aboriginal English. Fourth is the roles of non-standard varieties in creating social and cultural identities. And 5 is attitudes to the standard and to non-standard Australian language varieties. Alright, so let's talk quickly about the structure of an essay for English language. Okay, so like essays that you've done in the past, and you guys have done this before, so try and remember that as you're going through this. It has an introduction, it has at least 3 body paragraphs, and it has a conclusion as well. So you're used to writing analytical commentaries that don't require a conclusion, so please make sure you don't forget to put a conclusion in this upcoming SAC. Your body paragraphs need to involve 3 things. The first is quotes from linguists. You don't need one in every paragraph, but you should have a couple throughout your essay. The second thing is language examples from the real world, and I'm going to talk to you about where to find those in a minute. And the third is reference to the stimulus that you're given with the essay question. Alright, so this is what the essay question will look like. So you have a box that has the stimulus in it, and then the essay question is at the bottom. It's really important that you look for the essay question because some people do get caught up with just looking at what's in the box and they miss the essay question. So really make sure that you know the layout of the question, or the topic I should say, so that you know where the different parts of the topic are, so you're not missing the question itself. Alright, so we're going to talk now about what you need to do, so the process that you actually go through to unpack an essay and make a plan. The first thing you need to do is work out what the question is asking, and then also work out what position each of the stimulus takes about that particular topic. The second thing you need to do is decide on your contention, so what are you going to argue about this topic? The third thing you need to do is brainstorm or research examples of language use that you can use for the topic and look at relevant quotes from linguists. Okay, so here is a sample question. We're going to be working with this question throughout the rest of this video. So I'm just going to read you, I'll start with the essay question at the bottom in bold, and then I'll go through each of the stimulus. So the essay question is, an understanding of standard Australian English is needed to be able to communicate in all contexts in contemporary Australian society. To what extent do you agree with this statement? Support your response with linguistic evidence from at least 2 subsystems. Okay, so stimulus 1. Few areas of our experience are closer to us or more continually with us than our language. We spend a large part of our waking life speaking, listening, reading and writing. The central part of a language is its grammar, and this should be of vital interest to any intelligent, educated person. If it has not been of such interest, then the fault must be in the way in which it has been presented, or in the failure to recognise its importance within this essentially human activity, language. Stimulus number 2. There has been a noticeable upsurge in the use of Australian slang in politics from the 1970s. When Gough Whitlam became Prime Minister in 1972, Australia's highest office took on a distinctly Australian voice. This was the case in terms of accent, but also in the use of a distinctly Aussie idiom. Yet it's important to note that Polly's don't use Australianisms the same way, and some are better at doing it than others. Some may think this generation of millennials is destroying the English language with every word that comes out of their mouth, but Melbourne University linguist Rosie Billington says it's quite the opposite. When you're able to use language in a creative way, you show you are linguistically savvy because you know the language rules well enough to use words in a different way, she said. And finally, the last one. Although many young texters like to be different and enjoy breaking the rules, they also know they need to be understood. There is no point in paying for a message if it breaks so many rules of a language that it ceases to be intelligible. All right, we are going to go through each one of those in more detail later on. But first of all, we're going to start with unpacking the question itself. So what is the prompt asking me? So here we have it again. An understanding of standard Australian English is needed to be able to communicate in all contexts in contemporary Australian society. To what extent do you agree with this statement? Support your response with linguistic evidence from at least 2 subsystems. Alright, so these are the keywords that I have highlighted and unpacked. So I've started with standard Australian English. That gives me a clue that I do need to talk about the standard. So I'm talking about standard and non-standard varieties. The second thing I've highlighted is all contexts, and the word all here is particularly relevant to how we're going to plan out our essay. So it's asking me, do I agree that it's required in all contexts? Okay. Are there contexts that don't require the standard? So this is pretty black and white. It's kind of saying it's needed in every single context in all of Australian society. So immediately that gives me a little bit of a clue that I can actually challenge this prompt. And then the third thing that I've highlighted in the question is contemporary Australian society, because that gives me a clue that my examples do need to be recent. We're not talking about the language that was used when colonisation first happened. We're talking about language use from 2020. Then within the actual kind of question structure at the bottom here, I've highlighted to what extent, because that gives me a clue that I need to talk about both sides. Okay, it's an extent question, so I can say, yeah, a little bit of this, but also, there's this other idea that isn't addressed in this quote. And the second thing I've highlighted is linguistic evidence. That gives me a clue that I need to use meta-language, examples, and quotes from linguists. So I need to actually have my ideas supported by evidence that's based in linguistic study. Okay, so now I've unpacked what the question's asking me, I'm going to develop my contention. The way that I like to do this is to rewrite the essay prompt as a pretty basic question and just answer that question. And that kind of helps me establish or work out what I think about the prompt itself. So I've rewritten this question as, do you think you have to understand standard Australian English to be able to communicate with people in every context in Australia? My answer to this question is not really. While you do need standard Australian English in many contexts, I think there are some contexts in which it's better to use another variety of Australian English. Alright, then all I need to do is take that idea and make it sound more formal. So my final contention is that while standard Australian English is given prestige and is required in many contexts in Australian society, there are some contexts in which other varieties of Australian English are required and will be more effective than the use of standard Australian English. Okay, so this is more formal because I've taken out the pronouns. I've taken out I. I've taken out think as well. I'm just making statements. And I also am using the language of the essay prompt itself. So I'm using standard Australian English, I'm using prestige, I'm using contexts. Okay, so these are all words that I've taken from either the prompt or from the stimulus. Which leads us into unpacking the stimulus. So I need to establish which pieces of the stimulus agree with my contention. Which ones can I use? Or which ones can I challenge? Okay, so few areas of our experience are closer to us or more continually with us than our language. We spend a large part of our waking life speaking, listening, reading, and writing. The central part of a language, is its grammar, and this should be of vital interest to any intelligent, educated person. Now, I'm just thinking, intelligent, educated person is really making a judgment about whether the kind of person that uses or doesn't use correct, proper grammar. So that's already giving me a clue that this is probably prescriptivist approach. If it has not been of such interest, then the fault must be in the way in which it has been presented or in the failure to recognise its importance within this essentially human activity, language. I'm also looking at where that quote has come from. So this has come from a book called Grammar. So presumably this is a grammatical text that gives us information about grammar in English. So it's very likely that this is a prescriptivist attitude. So basically this is saying that grammar is important and we can make judgments based on people's intelligence based on the grammar that they use or don't use. So this is a prescriptivist attitude. Okay, stimulus number 2. There has been a noticeable upsurge in the use of Australian slang in politics from the 1970s. When Gough Whitlam became Prime Minister in 1972, Australia's highest office took on a distinctly Australian voice. This was the case in terms of accent, but also in the use of a distinctly Aussie idiom. Yet it's important to note that Pollies don't use Australianisms the same way, and some are better at doing it than others. Alright, so first of all, I'm noticing that this has come from Kate Burridge, who we know is a descriptivist, so it's very unlikely that this is going to be a prescriptivist attitude. It's also interesting that they're talking about the use of Australian slang in politics, which we would typically consider to be quite a formal realm in which language is used. But here they're saying that actually, this Australianisms and Aussie slang can be used in politics, but it's not really about what's being said, it's about who's saying it. So here we've got an example of Gough Whitlam being allowed to use these terms and it being accepted, but there's also a clue that where it says Pollies don't use Australianisms the same way and some are better at doing it than others. That gives us a clue that it might be interesting to try and find an example of a politician using an Australianism and being judged for it. Okay, so this is saying that non-standard language can be used in politics and can be appreciated or judged depending on who's using it. Okay, stimulus number 3. Some may think this generation of millennials is destroying the English language with every word that comes out of their mouth, but Melbourne University linguist Rosie Billington says it's quite the opposite. When you're able to use language in a creative way, you show you are linguistically savvy because you know the language rules well enough to use words in a different way, she said. Okay, I'm looking at the title of this, of where this quote's come from. Millennial lingo is getting a lot more complicated. Okay, so that gives me a clue that we're talking about teen speak, the language that teenagers use, and transient, non-permanent slang related to that particular group. This is a quote from a linguist who is saying that, even though people say that millennials and people who use teen speak are destroying the English language, that's actually not the case at all. So she's saying that teen speak is creative and it has rules. So this is a very descriptive attitude. So this gives me a clue that one of the possible topics that I could be talking about in my essay, one of my main ideas, could be centered around teen speak. And the 4th stimulus. Although many young texters like to be different and enjoy breaking the rules, they also know they need to be understood. There is no point in paying for a message if it breaks so many rules of a language that it ceases to be intelligible. Okay, so I noticed that this has come from David Crystal, who, if you remember from last year, is a linguist who is very descriptive. He's quite supportive of e-communication, digital language, teen speak, all of those kinds of things. So he's saying that, the rules have been broken, but this is still an effective way of communication, okay? If he's saying towards the end, if a message breaks so many rules that it ceases to be intelligible, it's not going to be useful. So he's saying that e-communication still functions as communication. It's creative, but it's useful. Again, this is a descriptive approach. And again, this does give us a clue as to a topic that we could be discussing in one of our paragraphs. So we've got also now this idea of e-communication. Okay, so that tells me that I've thought of a way in which I can use all of these pieces of stimulus. So the first one I could challenge if I want to, or I could talk about the fact that it's going to, grammar is important in Australian society. So it addresses that side of the question, that standard Australian English is really important in many contexts because we can be judged on our language and so on. The second one gives us an example of where non-standard use of Australian language can be appreciated or it can be judged. Okay, so it gives us an example of a context in which we can say that standard language is either required or the rules can be bent, and sometimes non-standard language can be appreciated as well. And then stimulus 3 and 4 also give us examples of how non-standard language is valued in Australian society. So those two also give us ideas of how we can approach creating our main ideas. All right, so now we've really understood where the stimulus is sitting, we understand what the topic is, we're going to talk about making a plan. So this is about organisation of your ideas and your examples. There are two things you need to do here. So the first thing is brainstorming. This is where you just have a think about all of the examples, all of the possible ideas that you can use. So I would start by dot pointing the different ideas that you could use to respond to that question. So things like language use in politics, language use by teens, language use in the digital world, those kinds of things. Then once you've got those ideas, think about what examples you have to support the ideas. And the ones that you have the most examples for, they're the ones that you're going to write paragraphs about. If you know that you could write a paragraph about politics in Australia, but you don't have any examples to support it, you're probably not going to write a paragraph on that. So you've got to think about the ideas in conjunction with the examples that you have. Once you've done that, you've done your brainstorm, you start to plan. So this is where you organise your ideas, examples, and you look for linguist quotes and reference to the stimulus into the paragraph. So work out which stimulus you're going to refer to in what paragraph, what parts of the stimulus you might use. You might use a quote, for example. And also the linguist quotes. So I have given you a quote bank. I would start by going through that and checking to see if there are any good quotes that relate to what you're trying to say, and pop those down in your dot pointed plan for each of your paragraphs. All right, so when you're looking for your own examples, where can you find them? These are where I like to find examples of language use when I'm looking to write an essay. So first of all, we've done the language use presentation slides, the weekly paragraph response. Each one of those is an example of language use that could be used in an essay. Now, some of them won't relate to this because they might be about formal or informal language or another topic that isn't relevant to this particular essay question, but they are fantastic places to start because the examples have been collected for you, they've been explained to you, and you've already had a go at writing an essay paragraph using that example, so you should be pretty familiar with them. So I'd start there. The second thing I'd be looking for is articles. So these could be news articles, most likely, but you also could look at journal articles, like proper peer-reviewed articles as well. I would start by searching keywords in the news tab of Google. So for example, you might look up digital language or teen language or millennial language in the news tab of Google. Remember that you are trying to find Australian examples, so try and look at Australian links that come up first. Use the Padlet. So I've been collecting resources, so I've been collecting articles and screenshots and that kind of thing and putting them on the Padlet for you. That's a really, really good resource for you to use. Don't forget that that's there. You also should be looking out on social media for your own collection of examples. So they could be screenshots of some digital language, for example, or of some teen speak, or of a prescriptivist or descriptivist attitude on a comment thread on an article on Facebook or something like that. So keep an eye out, make sure you're screenshotting things and keeping them in your own personal collection of examples. I also would really appreciate it if you want to put them up on the Padlet. That would be fantastic too. And you can also use your own personal life and experiences to help support your paragraphs as well. So have a think about things that you have encountered in terms of language in your everyday life. All right, so now we're on to organising our ideas. So you need to take your contention, your relevant examples, and your ideas and group them together to make a plan for each of the body paragraphs. So I've got my contention highlighted at the top there so I can keep referring back to that and making sure that the ideas that I'm putting down are actually relevant to my contention. So I've dot pointed 1, 2, 3, my 3 main ideas. So the first one is standard Australian English is required in many contexts. Does that relate to my contention? Yes, because the first part of it is that it's given prestige and is required in many contexts. Perfect. The second part of my contention is that sometimes other varieties are more useful. So I've got to think of 2 ways in which, or 2 varieties that could be more useful in different contexts. So my second idea is that teen speak is more useful when young people are communicating with each other. So there I've got a variety and I've got a context in which standard Australian English is not going to be quite as useful. And then I've done the same thing for the third idea. So Australian and regional slang can also be extremely effective methods of communication, occasionally even in contexts that might be considered typically more formal, such as politics. So for my plan, I've gone with the politics idea, but you easily could have instead a paragraph on digital language like was kind of signposted in the stimulus. That's fine too. Or you might have your own idea that hasn't been taken from the stimulus at all, and that also is completely fine. All right, so now we're looking at the structure of the paragraph. So we're on to writing the essay. So I've taken a sample body paragraph, and this is a body paragraph that responds to the first idea that I signposted. Standard Australian English is required in many contexts. All right, so an understanding of standard Australian English is important to facilitate successful communication in formal contexts. Context is an important factor in determining whether the use of standard Australian English is required. This is supported by Professor Louise Raelli, who states that no one language can cover all contexts. Standard Australian English is awarded prestige in the wider Australian community due to its codification in dictionaries and association with important individuals and institutions, including government, law, and education. Due to its strict adherence to prescriptivist rules, an understanding of standard Australian English is important in formal situations, such as a job interview, where relative power relations exist, and formal titles such as Sir and Madam instead of vocatives are used to uphold professionalism and respect in the relationship. Frank Palmer quotes that grammar should be of vital interest to any intelligent, educated person, Stimulus 1, evidencing that in educational settings, such as writing an essay for VCE English language, an understanding of standard Australian English is required to successfully communicate in these contexts. David Crystal supports this view as he notes that even in some informal contexts involving young texters, there is a point where language ceases to be intelligible, furthermore proving that aspects of standard Australian English are required to be understood. Therefore, an understanding of standard Australian English is important for communication in specific formal contexts. Okay, so here I've highlighted different parts of this paragraph just so you can see where each of the things that I've said need to be done have been done in this paragraph. So the yellow parts I've highlighted are the main idea. So I've got that at the very start and I've got that at the very end as well. In green, I have my linguist quote. Okay, so this is a quote that I have brought to this paragraph. It's not taken from the stimulus. In blue, I have my own personal examples of language use. So these are both, they're not taken from articles or things that have happened in the media, which probably are preferable. These have both been taken from examples in my own life, but that's fine as well. They still work. And then the two pink or red highlights, are my reference to the stimulus. So you can see I've got all of those things throughout this one paragraph. All right, it's now your turn to write an essay. So this is where you're going to get a chance to practice writing your own plan and your own essay in its entirety. Okay, so this is where you need to start. First thing you need to do is write your topic sentences. So you need to write a topic sentence for each of the three main ideas you established to support your contention. So once you've got your contention, topic sentences are the next thing. Or main ideas, dot point your main ideas. The second thing is to find evidence. So you find language examples and quotes from linguists to use, and you need to establish which stimulus you'll use for which main idea. you need to dot point these 2 stages, and that's kind of how you group your main idea. So when you hear your teacher say that they want to see evidence of planning, this is what we're looking for. Then once you've done those 2 things, you move on to writing. So put all of your information together in full paragraphs. Once you're done, I want you to go back and highlight all of the parts using the sample one that we just looked at. So use the same color scheme, go through and highlight where you've referenced your main idea, where you've referenced the stimulus, where you've included your own examples, and where you've included a quote from a linguist as well. Finally, I've just got some tips for writing the essay. So the first thing is, as I just said, make sure you spend time planning. It's so important. You just frankly can't write a good essay without writing at least some kind of a plan. The second thing you need to remember is that quotes from linguists and any kind of research that you want to include as well can be from any time period. You don't need to mention when it was said or when the research was done. That's fine. It can be from as long ago as you like. Evidence from society should be from 2020 or could be 2019 at the absolute earliest. If it is from 2019, it needs to be a really excellent piece of evidence for that particular topic. There shouldn't really be many instances in which you're using an example from 2019. Almost all of your examples, or preferably all of your examples, should be from 2020. You also need to spend at least 10 minutes at the end of the writing time to read over your essay. Look for silly mistakes like not having capital letters or sentences that go for more than 3 lines, or places where you could include more meta language instead of vague terms and that sort of thing as well. Okay, that takes us to the end of the slide. So I'd like you to now use the copy of the essay question that I've given you on the Google Classroom, and I'd like you to make your own plan for the essay and have a go at actually writing out your response to this essay question. I'd appreciate it if you then sent it to me so I can have a look at it and give you some feedback. You also should have a look through the essay writing checklist, because that gives you, before you submit it to me, go through the checklist and give yourself sort of a mark on those criteria to see where you probably need to improve things or where you've done something really well. The other thing I suggest you have a look at is the marking criteria for the essay for this topic. So that's from the VCAA. The blocked out black parts of it are the parts of the study design that have been taken out, so obviously don't worry about that, but it just is a good idea to have a read over that so that you know what you should be aiming for.